Now, over the course of Jujutsu Kaisen's main story, we see a good number of different domain expansions, all with their own unique environments, rules, and aesthetics, and they all work perfectly with the character who utilizes them. And throughout the first half of the main story, we get to see all of our villain cast, this being the natural disaster curses, use theirs in one way or another. All except one, that of course being Hanami, the land-based natural disaster, who, while possessing the ability to perform the technique itself, had their only attempt interrupted by the overwhelming power of Satoru Gojo. So, with that in mind, I wanted to go through Hanami's own curse technique and the other domains that we see through the series that might relate to them to try to structure together what exactly Hanami's domain could have been. Now, we know, as of Chapter 51 of Jujutsu Kaisen, A Flower Offering, that Hanami does possess the capability to perform domain expansion, being willing to use its guaranteed hit effect mixed together with one of the more powerful techniques in their arsenal to truly defeat someone that they weren't able to hit. That of course being Todo. Though, because they were interrupted before the formation period could finish, we never got to truly see what the domain itself looked like. But unlike this domain, we did get a good glimpse at Hanami's own curse technique throughout that story arc, and using this information mixed together with the design and functions of other characters' domains, I believe that we can accurately piece together what Hanami's domain expansion might have looked like. Though, before we can really begin our speculations, let's talk about the nature of domain expansion as a whole. Now, domain expansion is an exceptionally advanced curse technique in which the user connects to their own innate domain, or essentially the psychological landscape that embodies their mind and/or soul. Oftentimes, these landscapes can reflect the nature of their curse technique, or of course, the user's own personality. Now, this domain is then projected outwards onto the world through a barrier technique, creating an impossible space that matches up with the aesthetic of the said curse technique. The barrier itself is often reinforced from the inside to prevent anyone from escaping, but leaving the outside weak to most attacks. So, most competent sorcerers can easily pound their way into a domain, but once you're inside, you're essentially trapped. Though, there are some examples that show that you do not need a barrier to expand your domain. Along with this, the creator of the domain's curse technique gain an automatic hit property, meaning that when they attack someone from within the domain, it hones in on the target's own curse energy no matter how faint it be, unless they have absolutely no curse energy at all. Then the domain perceives them as simply an object like any other. As well, the design of the domain can say a lot about a certain character. As of course I mentioned, it reflects a blend of the user's mind and curse technique, either trying to capture their own terrifying power in physical form, demonstrating a single-minded desire related to their ability and leaving out any room for style, or just representing the beauty of what makes them special. Though, of course, this is still just the basics of what a domain can do. As I mentioned, some don't even require barriers, and others have different rules that only apply to them that aren't seen in any others. Though, when looking through the series' own domains and the rule sets applied to them, I believe that domains might have been directly inspired by one of Akatame's biggest influences, that of course being Yoshihiro Togashi and his manga, Hunter x Hunter. Specifically, the usage of Nen spaces seen mostly through the Chimera Ant arc, like with Chitu's own Tag, or Nov's hide-and-seek Nen Mansion, with Chitu's ability even having a rules mechanic to it similar to that of domains. Though, you could also argue that a lot of these properties are just conceptual evolutions from another one of Togashi's ideas, that being the psychic territories within the story of Yu Yu Hakusho, with one great example of it just being the Taboo game. Though, given how influential Togashi's work has been on Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a mixture of both. As well, domains being this sort of physical embodiment of both the user's spirit, but also being a pinnacle of their technique, seems to be influenced directly by the role of bankais in the story of Bleach, one of Akatame's other biggest influences. Now, with the nature and likely influence over domains mostly understood, we can move on to Hanami's own curse technique, which will help give us a better picture of what their innate domain might look like. Now, the curse technique Hanami uses, like all other natural disaster curses, is still officially unnamed as of this video's release, with some fans referring to it as the disaster plant technique, so I'll be using that name just for simplicity's sake. Now, disaster plants allows Hanami to do quite a few different things. Firstly, of course, due to their connection with nature, it allows Hanami to absorb the life energy of all plants within their general area and convert their life energy into curse energy, because as they say, plants do not possess the ability to generate curse energy. Though it would appear to even use this life force draining ability, Hanami requires the usage of their sealed off left arm. Now, the choice to make the left arm part of this ability the one that siphons life energy is likely in reference to the famous dualistic symbol of Chinese philosophy, yin and yang, and more specifically, yang, as yang is commonly associated with not only the left side of the body, but strength and of course the sun or solar energy, which can not only relate to one of their abilities, but just plant life as a whole, as plants get most of their energy from the sun. Hanami also possesses the ability to generate their curse energy into the form of cursed plants, all with different abilities and usages. So let's cover all of the flora that Hanami is able to create throughout their limited screen run. Starting first with one of their most common creations, this being roots, in which Hanami creates thick tree-like roots that can sprout from the ground at roughly any size they please, and can be freely manipulated by Hanami, meaning that Hanami can cause them to wrap around the leg of an unsuspecting sorcerer, while the other ones lunge out to stab at them. As well, Hanami seems to be able to use these roots as a sort of traveling system, being able to enter and exit through them at any given point. As well, Hanami seems to be able to give life to these roots in some way, allowing them to come to life and act on their own fruition, seen best when they capture Itadori during Hanami's rescue of Jogo. As we can see, the root that grabs Itadori has a face and autonomy. Now, even though this is one of Hanami's most used techniques, there isn't much I can think of outside of the nature of roots itself that could have possibly inspired this. Well, there is one thing, and that being one of the major design influences for Hanami as a whole. This being a Kaijin from Ultraman called Eleking, who has a tendency to attack with its own tail in a similar manner to how Hanami uses their roots. Though Eleking uses electricity on top of this, so this is a pretty significant stretch. But I couldn't ignore mentioning the clear inspiration that Eleking has on Hanami's design. Following this, we also see that Hanami can use this root-creating ability to generate kinomaris, or wooden balls, which have a function very similar to that of a naval mine, as it can erupt into a series of wooden spikes upon contact, or be ultimately dissolved when it's no longer required. As well, their ability to float around in the air is utilized by Hanami to maneuver around the battlefield with ease, being able to leap from one ball to another to avoid an attack, as well as just using them to float in the air. Now, the way Hanami uses the wooden balls actually reminds me a good bit of one of Akatame's earlier one-shots, number 9, and its protagonist, Tsukumo, and how he uses his own wooden block ability. But that character would go on to influence a much bigger character, so we'll return to talking about Hanami's balls. And the design of this cursed flora actually reminds me a good bit of a tumbleweed, a deceptively dangerous intrusive plant species which tends to create a significant problem for the drier areas of the United States, as they are not only a fire hazard, but are a rapidly multiplying menace that can pile up in areas if they are not well maintained. And with the nature of them being an invasive species that is directly harmful to humans, seems to play with Hanami's own feelings that nature and curses can exist in harmony as long as humans are eliminated. Then following these, we have one of the more deadly creations for dealing with sorcerers. This of course being the cursed buds, which are a parasite parasitic plant-like seed that is released into the air and latches onto a target, before lying in wait for them to use cursed energy. As the more cursed energy used by the afflicted sorcerer, the more the seed siphons from their body and grows its roots in deeper. Being an almost silent killer, their effects don't seem to be noticeable until it is already too late, and Hanami can create an overwhelming bundle of them in the form of a massive plant. And a good few elements of what makes this attack deadly actually reminds me a good bit of Leech Seed from Pokemon. Following this, we also have one of the first curse techniques that Hanami demonstrates the ability to use in the series, that of course being Flower Field, where Hanami can influence an area to bloom with a bouquet of cursed flowers, which can have any number of psychological effects on those caught in said area. Though the most common reaction we've seen is a stunning effect, where those who are in the affected area are overcome with some sort of intense emotion, be it they are mesmerized or overcome with euphoria. Ultimately, it's an attack with the purpose of enchanting their opponent for merely a moment to open up their defenses. And not to sound like a broken record, but the nature of this move also reminds me of another Pokemon move. This of course being the plethora of spore or powder-like moves like Sunspore, Poison Powder, or Sleep Powder. Though I'm sure this is just a coincidence. And then finally, we have the last usage of curse energy that we see Hanami use right before they had planned to open up their domain, as they began gathering together energy into some sort of powerful beam attack, which is unclear if it was directly tied to the domain's creation itself, but we do know, thanks to the Kendo Kobayashi interview with Akatame, that the attack Hanami was charging up is a bit slow, and that they were planning to use their domain's can't miss effect to hit Todo and Yuji. Which to me implies that not only is this a separate curse technique, but it's likely one of their most powerful, maybe even a maximum, though we don't technically know its name. Though, an intensely powerful attack that requires the gathering of energy and takes the form of a beam that comes out of an arm that symbolizes a connection to solar energy, that reminds me of... oh, god damn it! I thought Akatame was a Digimon kid, what the... Now, with all this together, we have a better idea of how Hanami's curse technique works. And luckily for us, we actually have information from a data book that we can use to paint a picture of the domain as well. This of course being that Hanami's domain expansion actually was given a name. Yes, their domain has a name, but we still do not know the name of their curse technique. The irony of the situation, it certainly exists. But either way, it is called the Ceremonial Sea of Light, or Daikokai, which is a name that not only works with Hanami's own name being indicative of a flora-based ceremony in Japan, that of course being the Cherry Blossom Viewing Festival, but also implies to me that Hanami's domain would take a more beautiful form rather than a destructive or dark one. Something like a field of flowers, maybe even similar to the real-world Hitachi Seaside Park, located of course in Hitachi, Japan. One of the most famous flower parks in Japan, and it has oftentimes been praised for its own dreamlike appearance. Now, the other major reason that I imagine Hanami's takes on a more beautiful appearance is a very similar one to that of Dagon, one of the other natural disaster curses, as their domain is this beautiful beachside that represents not only their love for the ocean, but their appreciation for the thing that gave them life. Hanami is seen showing a great love for the earth and its flowers, even regretting having to take the lives of the plants in order to achieve their goals. So, to me, it just makes sense that their domain would possess a representation of that beauty and appreciation. As well, the effects of the domain, based on its name, could utilize a few elements of Hanami's own curse techniques. So with that in mind, I believe that the flowers in Hanami's domain would be a mixture of the cursed buds and flower field, draining not only all those who are trapped within the domain of all of their curse energy, but also putting them into a delirious state. It's even possible that Hanami could even absorb this curse energy out from the cursed buds, so that of course they can then fire off as many 100% accuracy solar beams as they desire. Though, with that all said and done, this of course is just my best guess based on the information that we were presented in the story of Jujutsu Kaisen itself, as well as with the trends and how domains tend to function based based on the characters. And I do think it's a real shame that we never actually got to see Hanami's full potential unleashed like we did with the other two natural disasters, especially since they had one of the cooler designs in general. And I do plan to cover them in more detail at some point in the future, but due to the speculative nature of this video, I wanted to make it its own dedicated thing because I wanted to keep it separated from the main character discussion. But with that all said and done, do you agree with my interpretation? Would you change anything yourself about Hanami's own domain? Let me know below. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like in the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/MeatyNotTheBadGuy. Every little bit helps keep this channel flowing as smoothly as it does. And if you want to awaken to your own domain, well, the best place you can do so is by buying a copy of Shimoneta at buyshimoneta.com.